Let's move on then to Biden's transitory recession. You may have heard a lot about recession recently, a lot of worries that the economy is going badly. Thankfully, elite-sponsored economists are here to tell you that actually everything's going great. Everything isn't getting more expensive. Your household income is perfectly fine. Don't worry, take the Soma, go back to sleep. I'll draw everyone's attention to an article that Rory released this morning called A Day in the Sun, because as we know, a lot of the terrible economic policies that are being pushed, that are causing a lot of the strife that's going on right now, are due to green climate initiatives. And this is an article that Rory wrote about the recent heat wave frenzy that we had over in the UK, a heat wave that lasted exactly 2 days and was, if I'm completely honest, at most mildly uncomfortable, but not particularly unwelcome because we get enough terrible weather over here as it is, that it's nice to at least have 1 or 2 hot days per year. But with all of the frenzy, you see things like the maps being changed from a nice, lovely, cool green to a deep blood red to let everybody
we're
know.
gonna burn in Hades. And like on a serious note, the British Medical Journal in 2015 did a huge study of deaths during hot weather and deaths during cold weather, and found out that cold weather kills 20 times as many people as hot weather. And I'm not denying that climate change exists, as human activity is a factor in it. But I'm saying, so far, we're not seeing the devastation. So far, it's probably saving more lives than it costs, because...
I mean, during winter, it's been notorious for a very long time that, yes, old people drop off in winter because they may not put their heating on, they may have trouble paying for their heating, and if they're really cold in the night, they might just gone.
Yeah, and also, being cold means, depresses your immune system, so you can't fight off pneumonia and things like that.
Yeah, and just at the end of the day, you can say that climate change is happening without agreeing with the political policies that are being put in place and going, hold up, isn't this actually destroying any life that we want to live right now in possible hopes of saving a future that our great-great-grandchildren might be able to enjoy?
And I'm wary of any government that comes to me and says, look at all this. All this means that we've got to raise taxes and you've got to give me a whole lot more power.
That is always worrying.
Can we deal with this without giving the government a huge amount of power?
I mean, governments always like to find problems that the only solution is more government. We can't really be surprised that that's what they come up with. But anyway, moving on. In America especially, this is very, very clear that they are trying to change the discourse on what's going on. For instance, Wikipedia has had the definition of recession changed a number of times, which I'll get onto. I think it's been changed up to 24 times recently, as there has been a slight editor battle on Wikipedia of people trying to frame the narrative in one way or the other. Just to make it clear, for a very long time, recession has unofficially and colloquially been understood to happen when there has been 2 quarters in a row of GDP negative growth, aka shrinkage, where the growth of the country is not positive. So that's generally how we use recession. That's generally how we recognize it, or at least one of the indicators. But as we can see, the RNC has put together this little compilation of Democrat and mainstream journalists all saying transition period and other such things, so they can absolutely avoid saying a recession. Let's just play a clip to see how blatant it is.
How we transition from a historic economic recovery.
We're at a transitional moment.
We are in a transition, there's no doubt. The economy is slowing. We are seeing a slowing. That is not only expected but necessary as we operate through this transition.
What we're seeing is that we are in a transition.
We're clearly moving through a transition.
That we can make a transition, we hope.
Well, we're in a transition.
That's appropriate and necessary to transition.
Well, we're certainly in a transition.
That cooling was expected and part of a transition.
An economy that is transitioning.
We transition into this kind of strong, stable, shared growth.
The goal is for us to be able to make a transition.
When it comes to the economy at this point, at this time, we're seeing a transition.
We're in a period of transition in which growth is slowing.
I'll tell you, that's going to be a problem even as we get through this transition, and that's going to be a focus for us even as we get through this transition as well.
Yeah, everyone just loves those transitions where you lose your business, you lose your job, you lose your car, you lose the ability to afford basic necessities. Everybody loves those transitions, don't they? They're all just trying to sweep the problem under the rug and ignore that it's happening and just say that it's like necessary. And the thing is, ironically, traditionally, economically speaking, a recession is a transitionary period. It's a period where there has been a big boom, and then all of a sudden the economy, through whatever mechanism, recognizes that there has been malinvestment. People have been putting money into stupid investments that all collapse, and then this is supposed to be the economy righting itself.
Yeah, so it's an opportunity. Recessions aren't necessarily a bad thing. I mean, they're a bad thing if you get caught in the wrong end of it.
In the short run,
they allow money and people, money and labor, to be redistributed to places where it's more productive.
Yeah, where it's more productive. The only problem is that when you have governments trying to insert massive levels of intervention, you end up with the Great Depression of the late 20s and the entirety of the 1930s and the early 1940s as well, because what was it the government tried to do when the stock market crash happened? Well, at first they left it alone for a few months, and then of course Herbert Hoover came in with his Smoot-Hawley tariffs, which made the problem far worse. All of a sudden, unemployment at that point, which had been dropping from the spike that it had, went straight back up again, and then you get FDR coming in with his New Deal, and then all of a sudden you get like 10 consecutive years of double-digit unemployment figures in America. So that's what economic intervention from the government during a recession gets you, and sadly that does seem to be what the American government is trying to do now. We know that they had the Build Back Better bill, which I don't think went through, but was trying to allocate something like $1.75 trillion to intervention and economic infrastructure, just to make it so that from cradle to grave you are the property of the government and they have to look after you like they're your parents or something. And one of the reasons for all this, as I've mentioned, is the green economic policy. And let's take a look at what Joe Biden was saying 3 years ago today about how they need to clamp down on fossil fuels.
Would there be any place for fossil fuels, including coal and fracking, in a Biden administration?
No, we would work it out. We would make sure it's eliminated. No more drilling on federal lands. No more drilling, including offshore. No ability for the oil industry to continue to drill, period. I guarantee you we're going to end fossil fuel.
What about, say, stopping fracking and stopping new pipeline infrastructure?
Exactly. No new fracking. I've argued against any more oil drilling or gas drilling on federal lands.
No one's going to build a coal-fired plant again, and we're going to get rid of the ones we have now.
Have a transition from the oil industry, yes.
Would you be willing to sacrifice some of that growth, even knowing potentially that it could displace thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands of blue-collar workers in the interest of transitioning to that greener economy?
The answer is yes.
There it is. Are you willing to destroy hundreds of thousands of people's lives so that you can virtue signal that you really do care about climate change? Absolutely, to phrase that question in a more honest way. And we've seen the exact same thing over here in the UK, sadly, because we've got net zero targets and other such things that people like Farage and even Kemi Badenoch are questioning and saying that we need to be able to do some kind of referendum on net zero, seeing as it is demolishing the economy. And it's meant that we've got supply chain issues, we've got issues with energy, we've got electric bills absolutely soaring. We've got fuel prices, which have been, kicking my ass for a while now because everything is ridiculously expensive. And it is the same over in the US, and we're getting shortages. Even butter. Have you been to a shop to buy butter recently?
No.
It's ridiculous. It's like even the cheap store brand ones are like £3 for a tub now.
Jeez.
And if you go for Lurpak or any of the bigger brands, you can go between £5 to £7 just for a tub of butter.
This is why I make my own butter.
I don't need to know any more about that process. Do you own a farm?
No. You just get cream and you shake it.
No. Oh, okay. Just get cream and you shake it.
Just get cream and you shake it. Just get cream in a bottle, not a bottle like that, like a jar. Just shake the cream.
Interesting.
Butter will form.
We swear. But yeah, everything's not looking good economically. A lot of people are feeling the squeeze, myself included, and it's just not looking great. And the fact that the elites are trying to deny this is even happening in the first place is ridiculous. As I mentioned, 2 quarters in a row of negative economic growth, GDP-wise, is generally seen as an unofficial way of recognizing that a recession is going on. Look at this. Look at this graph. United States GDP growth rate, what's that we've got right there? You can see back in January and July of 2020, there was a massive economic downturn, but that was to be expected because of lockdowns, which were implemented by the government. Let's not forget that. Yep. But now we do have, even though it's slight and looks like it's nowhere near as bad as it was back in 2020, we do have slight economic downturns in the first 2 quarters of this year. And this has global repercussions, because America's economy is so huge that it does impact the rest of the global economy. If, for instance, Biden hadn't shut down so many domestic oil and fracking industries as part of the US, as part of his initiative for the US, perhaps we in the UK would be able to get oil and natural gas from over there, rather than having to suffer from the imports and other such terrible ideas and sanctions that we've been putting on Russia.
Well, yeah, it's an absolute nonsense that, so under Trump, they had fracking, they had the tar sands and all this kind of stuff. And, so America was pretty much energy self-sufficient. And then Biden came in and like in Europe, was like, oh no, we need to get rid of all fossil fuels, but you can't get rid of fossil fuels because we're all using fossil fuels. So what they do is they cut off fossil fuel production and import it. The only people who you can really import fossil fuels in large quantities from are absolute despotic, horrific regimes like Russia. Not Iran because they've got sanctions against them, or Saudi Arabia. So these are people who torture and murder journalists. Well, we've seen the horrific stuff Russia's doing in Ukraine and to its own citizens. So I mean, being energy self-sufficient is a fantastic idea, and it, as well as removing that leverage that these horrible regimes have over you, it means that you provide jobs to your own citizens. But I mean, it's so. The sort of woke ideology has got such a vice-like grip on people. The Green Party in Scotland, who support the SNP, say that anybody who wants to work in the oil industry in the North Sea is a far-right extremist. Anybody who wants a job.
Yeah, to people trying to make a living in their life, that's absolutely ridiculous. And the fact that this is all going on while people are generally ignoring the nuclear option, and I mean that in terms of nuclear power, I'm not saying to blow anyone up or anything, but they're ignoring the nuclear option. They don't want to discuss it. If you could talk to people like AOC in America, I would imagine that she would have nothing but disparaging remarks to say about nuclear, because if you look at her Green New Deal, I don't remember nuclear power ever being mentioned in that.
Yeah.
There was a lot
even though it's the cleanest and safest form of power, apart from, I think, solar. But even wind power kills more people. But
solar has such a ridiculously low energy efficiency for the amount of space that it needs as well. In the first, you'd need to destroy half of the UK countryside to even be able to produce a fraction of the power.
And it only works when the sun is shining. So you better.
So
hope
we're
for
screwed here, aren't we?
For more heat waves.
Yeah, and let's carry on though. And I just want to point out as well, actually, that I know GDP is not necessarily the best metric for this sort of thing, and I will be looking at other metrics that you could look at to be able to tell whether an economy is doing well, because GDP has a number of issues, primarily, number one being that it includes government spending. Government spending is not necessarily productive or positive in any way, and the government, if it comes to it, can just print themselves even more money to spend it on even more useless stuff if they want. So it's not always the best metric to check, but it is still a metric of economic growth. And like I say, they are trying to block the idea of a recession being in progress as we speak. It's been in progress for about 2 years, I would say. But they are saying that what is a recession? Wikipedia can't decide, from NPR, that bastion of truth, talking about how on Thursday they got the report of the 0.9% decrease shrinkage in the GDP, and then since then there's been this battle ongoing on Wikipedia of people saying that it's this or it's that or it's this or that, and they have blocked it now because it was just getting a bit too much for poor old Wikipedia moderators, And then people on Facebook are getting fact-checked. Senior economists are being fact-checked by Facebook for saying the US is in a recession. He quoted saying, "We live in an Orwellian hellscape," because he can't just say what is plain and obvious for everybody. And then we get on to the mainstream media's look at what this is. So we all know, Brian Stelter, right? CNN clown.
Right.
Oh, well, he's one of the reporters for CNN, absolute clown. In this article, it talks about how on his show on Sunday, the New York Times columnist and economist Paul Krugman replied, "No, we aren't, and no, it doesn't," when he was asked, "Are we in a recession, and does the term matter?" So According to a mainstream professional economist, we're not in a recession. That's great. I can suddenly afford butter now. Fuel prices are just magically gone down because Paul Krugman, who is definitely not a completely ridiculous human being, said so. He also said none of the usual criteria that real experts use says that we're in a recession right now. What does matter, he stated? The state of the economy is what it is. Jobs are abundant. And this is the frame game they're trying to make, is they're trying to reframe it so that it's because there's more jobs available, because the job market is good, that means we're not in a recession.
Yeah.
Which is
even though you're not earning enough to, and also there's a wage price spiral, which is partly caused by the fact that there's incredibly low unemployment. But yeah, so people, we're seeing double-digit inflation. So then wages have to go up. You're seeing people striking to get more pay. So then wages go up. So then people have to start charging more for the stuff that those people are making because it's costing them more. And then other people have to get paid more to be able to afford the stuff that they're making. And before you know it, you're in the Weimar Republic.
Yes, so you do get hyperinflation, which is what the Biden administration seems to be going for. And over in the UK, we face the terrifying prospect of Rishi Money Printer Sunak potentially being in charge, which will not solve everything. It will not solve anything, especially when he's like, no, we don't want to give you tax hikes and tax cuts. In fact, we might hike taxes for the good of the economy.
Well, I'm wondering if the Tory party is using tax as a way of dampening the wage price spiral. Because, I mean, I'm paying so much tax. We're talking.
That is how they will be looking at it. There's the MMT framework sees taxes as being money taken out of the economy to prevent inflation.
So it leaves,
but that's ridiculous.
It leaves you with less money to buy stuff with. But I mean, I don't want my money. Why can't they take it off somebody who's already rich? I'm just making my money.
Well, even then,
take it off like somebody who sits around all day.
Even then, yeah, I mean, you could cut the welfare state quite a bit. You could be able to, I mean, you could think about potentially cutting government spending rather than hiking taxes, but that will never be the answer. And just to take a quick moment to laugh at Paul Krugman. This is the man who wrote this opinion column in the New York Times back at November 2020, making the most of the coming Biden boom. I hope you all made the most of it, because it's done, if it even showed up in the first place. He says that this suggests that Joe Biden will eventually preside over a soaring morning in America type recovery. Did anybody feel that? Did our American viewers feel that? No.
There was a brief moment in the stock market. So I bought a lot of recovery stocks. When we were coming out of when we were right in the trough, I bought like oil and airlines and stuff like that. And coming out, they did shoot up. So IAG, who own British Airways and stuff, they were shooting up. IAG went up to 225 or something. Now it's down around, I think, 115.
Yeah, there was a brief period where it spiked a little bit. So if that day or two while that happened was the Biden boom, then I suppose congratulations, it happened. But let's check in on what else he's saying nowadays recently, where a recent article from just over a week ago, he just comes out, I was wrong about inflation. Oh, were you? Were you? Could other people have warned you of what might have been happening there? Everyone in the debate back in the 2020 agreed that deficit spending would stimulate demand and cause massive inflation. Everyone agreed that a stronger economy with lower employment rate would, other things equal, have a higher inflation rate. Once again, throwing away the idea that printing billions and billions of dollars that didn't exist before would cause inflation. No. It's having a strong economy with lots of people working. That's the only thing that causes inflation. Well, potentially a bit of supply and demand is in work there, but yes, perhaps supply and demand also works in terms of the money supply. And then he carries on, yet inflation soared anyway, but why? Much, although not all of the inflation surge, seems to reflect disruptions associated with the pandemic. Fear of infection and changes in the way we live cause big shifts in the mix of spending. People spent less money on services and more on goods, leading to shortages of shipping containers, overstressed port capacity, and so on. These disruptions help explain why inflation rose in so many countries, not just in the United States. I mean, he's saying all of this and somehow saying that we're not at the same time in a recession. He's admitting we've got massive inflation. He's admitting that we've got ridiculous shortages going on because of supply chain issues that mean that people can't get basic necessities depending on where you are. And he's still like, people are employed though, people are working, so what's the problem, guys? Looking ahead, the economy is currently cooling off. The decline in first quarter GDP was probably a quirk, but overall growth seems to be running below trend. Oops, that really didn't age very well, did it? And it was only a little over a week ago. That first dip in GDP in the first quarter, we'll be back to normal in no time. Oops, big oops. And then he even tried to back this one up again yesterday with this amazing... I can't believe he tweeted this in all seriousness. Right. The problem may be that the Biden economy boomed too much, feeding inflation, and that it now needs to cool off, which may involve a recession. So we were so successful.
When he's talking about a boom, he's talking about all the excess money that was put into the economy, because the US government printed, and the UK government printed, with quantitative easing, printed so much money, and every extra pound that's created, or every extra dollar that's created, devalues all the dollars in existence. So all of a sudden, you've got all this money flooding into the economy. It's going on furlough or whatever, so people are getting this, accumulating all this money.
They also bailed out a load of big industries and firms as well.
Yeah. So when things open up and people can spend that money, you get you saw it in restaurants. There was the post-COVID. There's the post-COVID, hike in prices. And which, they haven't put their prices down again because people had this excess money. But that, basically, man, don't print money. It didn't work in Zimbabwe, didn't work in the Weimar Republic. It's not going to work in the UK or in America in 2022.
Yeah, well, sorry, Leo, but we're the West and we're just better, therefore it will work somehow. This time it'll work. We swear to God. And Paul Krugman is the type of person who is the establishment shill, egging on the government, telling them that this can happen. And one of the problems that I didn't really see much of a boom was because a lot of that money came into play during the lockdowns, where a lot of businesses were shut down. So if there was a boom, I'll give you the two companies who got most of that money. Amazon, Netflix, and maybe a few takeaway restaurants that were still open at the time. That's who got all of that money, okay? So if there was a boom, I didn't feel any of the positive effects of it. And we got this guy, Yossi Gestetner, who posted this tweet saying, trying to refute a lot of this that was going on, especially refute the idea that high employment is a thing that's happening right now, and that even constitutes whether we're in a recession or not, where he says 152.5 million people were employed right before the lockdowns, 151.9 million were employed last month. If adding no net new jobs in more than 2 years is not a recession, then I don't know what is. I actually do know 6 months of negative GDP and economic activity, and at the bottom of this thread, he sums up just saying, long-running definition of recession has been dumped in the last 10 days. What is a recession has yet to be declared, and the mumbling that we are not, why we are not in a recession, strong labour market is what they're saying, is false as things are bad. Yet people are buying the non-recession talk, and that's because a lot of people are sadly slaves to the establishment media narrative. And if we carry on, we can see places like CBS saying, who decides if we're in a recession? 8 economists you've likely never heard of. And this article, just like the title alone should tell you that this is a worthless article, but I don't know if you've heard of the economist Richard Wolff. He's a Marxist economist, lolcow.
A Marxist economist?
I know it's a contradiction in terms.
Oh my God, it's like a fat stripper.
Well, they quote him in this as some kind of authoritative voice on the subject, and he points out, there's a lot of in-group, out-group preference with these few economists and everything, and it's trying to discredit the idea. And yes, I do think it's a little bit silly, maybe, that we have 8 economists in the US who determine whether we're in recession or not, when it should be obvious to everybody. But still...
Yeah, it's just a measurable rule. It's like, 2 quarters of economic decline.
Yeah, but the article is just basically saying, they're a bunch of white men, though. There's only 2 women on it. Therefore, just throw their opinion out the window, as you would expect. We've also got one of the other ways that you can measure how well an economy is doing is, as I've mentioned, the shortages that are going on. And let's see how America's doing there. Well, we've got the baby formula shortage due to issues with a recall of products from one of the big, I think it's one of the big baby formula producers, and the fact that they wanted to shut down a factory so that the government wouldn't be able to look into it because they were about to put a load of regulations on them. We've got stores in New York beginning to lock up spam in plastic cases because of a crime spike. And they say petty larceny complaints are up 52% in the precinct where the Port Authority is located compared to last year. And in addition to the rise in crime, inflation spiked to 9.1% in June, which the New York Post explained has created a market for thieves to sell stolen discounted goods to cash-strapped consumers. So everything's going great in there. We've got an egg shortage in Australia, and we've also got warning in the UK UK over cheese shortages. I mean, you'd think that the cheese shortage would be a terrible thing for America, but we're the ones with the cheese shortages, apparently. And once again, we've got representatives in America pushing for even more spending and the possibility of Rishi Money Printer Sunak taking over as PM in the UK. Please don't let that happen, everyone. So, in the end, all I can say, and I don't want to end this on too much of a black pill, but unless the structure of government is changed from the foundations up in terms of how what sort of fingers they have and influence they have over the economy, we're all doomed.
If you appreciated that segment from the podcast of the Lotus Eaters, you can go to lotuseaters.com to get access to all the premium content we have on the site, such as this premium article on how the Russian establishment views the Ukraine conflict, with a audio track for silver and gold tier members. If you want to find out what else we're putting out on the website, you can follow us on Getter at lotuseaters_com on Getter. Thank you and goodbye.